I was standing at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee when I saw Brenda Mortimer, the HOA president, trampling through what was clearly my side of the property line with a team of landscapers. This wasn't a casual stroll. She had blueprints, stakes, and what looked like an entire nursery's worth of ornamental plants loaded on a flatbed trailer. My name is Vincent Xavier, and I'd bought this 3-acre property in Willow Creek, Georgia, 6 months ago. It was a dream come true after years of saving. The house itself was a modest ranch-style home, but the land was what I'd really purchased. I had plans for that land: vegetable gardens, maybe some chickens, a workshop. Real plans that I'd spent months sketching out and researching. The property came with a survey that clearly marked the boundaries, and I'd had it verified by a licensed surveyor before closing. I knew exactly where my land started and ended. Brenda was planting on my side of the line, not close to it, not accidentally over by a foot or two. She was a good 15 feet onto my property, setting up what looked like an elaborate flower garden complete with decorative stones, a small fountain, and raised beds. I set down my coffee and walked outside. The morning air was crisp, typical for early March in Georgia. The landscapers were already digging, their shovels breaking through the red clay soil that characterized this part of the state. "Brenda," I called out as I approached. "What's going on here?" She turned to me with that smile I'd come to recognize over the past 6 months. It was the smile of someone who believed they were always right, always in control, and always doing you a favor even when they were stepping on your neck. "Vincent, good morning. I'm so glad you're here to see this. The HOA has decided to create a community garden space, and this spot is just perfect. It'll really beautify the neighborhood entrance." "This is my property," I said, keeping my voice level. "You're 15 feet over the property line." "Oh, I don't think so," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I had someone look at the plat maps, and this area is designated as common space." I pulled out my phone. I'd started keeping the survey documents on it after the 3rd time Brenda had tried to tell me what I could and couldn't do with my own land. "This is the survey from my closing. See this pin right here?" I pointed to a metal stake about 20 feet away. "That's the boundary. Everything from there to my house is mine." Brenda barely glanced at my phone. "That survey must be old. The HOA has updated maps. This is common area and we're well within our rights to improve it." "When did the HOA update the maps? And how did they change the boundaries of my deeded property?" "I don't have time to explain all the technical details to you right now. The landscapers are on a schedule." She turned back to the workers. "Keep going, gentlemen. Put the fountain base right there." I stood there for a moment, processing the sheer audacity. This woman was literally stealing my land and acting like I was the unreasonable one for objecting. "Brenda, I'm telling you right now, stop this work. You're trespassing and you're damaging my property." "I'm doing no such thing. This is HOA business, and as a resident of Willow Creek Estates, you need to respect the board's decisions. The board can't decide to take my property. No one's taking anything. We're improving the community. You should be thanking us. This garden is going to increase all our property values." I took a deep breath. "I'm asking you one more time to stop this work and leave my property. And I'm telling you this isn't your property. Now, if you don't mind, some of us have work to do." She turned her back to me and started directing the landscapers on where to place a particularly large ornamental boulder. I walked back to my house and immediately called my real estate attorney, Marcus Webb. I'd kept his number handy specifically because I'd had a feeling the HOA would eventually push things too far. This neighborhood had seemed perfect when I'd bought in, but Brenda's true colors had shown themselves pretty quickly. First, it was complaints about my truck being visible from the street. Then it was citations because my grass was a quarter-inch too tall according to her measurements. Now this. Marcus answered on the third ring. Vincent, what's happened now? The HOA president is literally building a garden on my property. Right now. I've told her to stop, shown her the survey, and she's refusing to leave. How far onto your property? 15 feet, maybe more. And you've documented this, taking photos right now. I snapped several pictures through my window, making sure to get the survey pin in some of the shots to show the clear boundary violation. Good. Here's what you need to do. Send me those photos. Then send Brenda a text message, right now, clearly stating that she's on your property without permission, that you've asked her to leave, and that any improvements made will be removed. Keep it factual, no emotions. After that, call the non-emergency police line and report the trespassing. You need a paper trail. Will the police actually do anything? Probably not much for a civil property dispute, but you need the report. It establishes that you took immediate action. Then we'll send a cease and desist letter. If she continues after that, we can get an injunction. How long will all that take? The letter I can get out today. An injunction, if needed, maybe a week. I looked out the window. The landscapers were unrolling sod. Marcus, in a week they'll have this whole thing completed. I understand your frustration, but you have to go through the proper channels. If you take matters into your own hands, you could end up being the one in legal trouble. We hung up, and I did exactly what he said. I sent Brenda a text message, clear and factual. She responded within 2 minutes. This is HOA common area. Your survey is incorrect. Stop harassing me or I'll fine you for violation of community harassment policies. I called the non-emergency police number for Willow Creek. The dispatcher listened to my complaint and said they'd send an officer when one was available. 2 hours later, a deputy sheriff arrived. By that point, the landscapers had planted about 30 shrubs, installed the fountain, and were working on a decorative stone border. Deputy James Morrison listened to both sides. I showed him my survey. Brenda showed him a hand-drawn map that looked like it had been made in Microsoft Paint. The deputy looked uncomfortable. This is really a civil matter, he said. You two need to work this out between yourselves or through the courts. Madam, he nodded to Brenda, if this gentleman has a survey showing this is his property, you might want to reconsider what you're doing here. Deputy, I assure you the HOA has done its due diligence. This is common area. Do you have a survey showing that? He asked. I have our community plat map. That's not the same thing as a survey. Sir, he turned to me, you should probably contact an attorney. I have. He's sending a cease and desist letter. There you go. That's the way to handle this. He looked relieved to have a path out of the situation. Madam, you might want to hold off on any more work until this gets cleared up legally. Deputy, I appreciate your input, but the HOA has a right to maintain and improve common areas. We're not doing anything wrong. Deputy Morrison shrugged. Like I said, it's a civil matter. You folks have a good day. He left, probably grateful to get away from what he correctly recognized as an HOA dispute that would never end well for anyone involved. Brenda triumphantly turned back to her landscapers. You heard the officer. We're not doing anything wrong. Keep working. I spent the rest of the day watching my property get violated. By sunset, Brenda had installed a complete garden, raised beds filled with fresh soil and ready for planting, ornamental grasses, a working fountain with solar panels, decorative lighting. A small seating area with a bench. It was actually beautiful, which somehow made it worse. She'd put thought into this. She'd planned it, and she'd deliberately chosen to put it on my land. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus's advice to go through proper channels. I believed in doing things the right way. I really did. But I also knew how HOAs operated. They counted on people being too tired, too busy, or too intimidated to fight back. They counted on the process being so slow and expensive that people would just give up. Brenda was counting on that right now. The next morning, I received Marcus's cease and desist letter by email. It was professional and thorough, clearly stating the legal facts and demanding that the garden be removed immediately. I printed it out and walked over to Brenda's house, 3 doors down from mine. She answered the door in a pristine white pantsuit, clearly about to head somewhere important. "Vincent, what is it now?" Cease and desist letter from my attorney. I handed it to her. "You need to remove that garden from my property." She barely glanced at it. "Your attorney is wasting your money. This will be resolved in the HOA's favor and you'll be responsible for all costs." "Brenda, why are you doing this? There's plenty of actual common area in this neighborhood. Why put the garden on my land?" "Because that spot is perfect for the neighborhood entrance. It's visible from the main road, it's flat, and it gets good sun. It's the right place for the garden. But it's my property. According to you. According to a licensed surveyor and the deed recorded with the county. We'll see what a judge says." She started to close the door. "Wait. You're really willing to go to court over this?" "I'm willing to defend the HOA's rights, yes. We have a responsibility to all the homeowners in Willow Creek Estates to maintain community standards and improve our shared spaces." "It's not a shared space. It's my space." "Have a good day, Vincent." She closed the door. I stood there on her porch, feeling a surge of anger that I hadn't felt in years. I'm generally an even-tempered person. I don't yell, I don't throw things, I don't make scenes. But this woman was stealing my land and acting like I was the problem for objecting. Over the next 3 days, Brenda continued to work on the garden. She planted vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans. She installed a drip irrigation system that she connected to the HOA's water supply. She put up a small sign that read, "Willow Creek Community Garden, please enjoy responsibly." Marcus filed for an emergency injunction. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out. "It's the fastest I could get," he told me. The judge's calendar was packed. 2 weeks. She'll have vegetables growing by then. I know, but this is the process. Document everything she does. Every plant, every change, we'll need it for court. I documented it all. I took photos every day, I took videos, I measured. I kept a detailed log and I got angrier. On the 6th day, I came home from my job at the engineering firm where I worked to find Brenda sitting on the bench in her garden, drinking iced tea and chatting with 2 other neighborhood women. They were laughing, enjoying the early spring afternoon in my stolen space. Something inside me snapped. I didn't go confront them. I didn't yell. I just went inside, called Marcus, and told him what I was planning to do. "Vincent, I strongly advise against that. What's she going to do, sue me for removing an illegal garden from my own property?" "Yes. That's exactly what she'll do. And while you'll probably win eventually, it'll cost you thousands in legal fees and months of your time." She's already costing me thousands in legal fees and months of my time. I understand your frustration, but you need to wait for the injunction hearing. We're going to win this in 2 weeks, after she's had 3 weeks to establish possession of my land. You know how property law works, Marcus. Possession is 9/10. Every day I let this stand, it gets harder to undo. That's not exactly how it works in a situation like this. But it doesn't help. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "No, it doesn't help, but you still need to wait for the legal process. What if I just plow it under? Then you'd be destroying her property." "It's on my property. She built it without permission. How is it her property?" "Because she built it, she owns the improvements even if they are on your land. It's complicated. That's why we need the court to sort this out. So I'm supposed to just watch her use my land. For 2 more weeks, yes. I thanked Marcus and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table and thought hard about what to do. I wasn't a rash person. I didn't make impulsive decisions. But I also wasn't going to let someone steal from me and get away with it just because they hid behind an HOA title and a slow court system. The next morning was Saturday. I woke up early before dawn. I went to my shed and pulled out my tractor. It was a good-sized John Deere that I'd bought specifically for maintaining my 3 acres. I attached the plow implement that I'd purchased for eventually preparing my own garden beds. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky orange and pink, when I drove the tractor over to Brenda's illegal garden. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the plow and started making passes through the garden. The fountain's base cracked under the weight of the tractor. The raised beds splintered. The young plants disappeared into the churned earth. The decorative stones scattered. The bench ended up in 2 pieces. It took about 20 minutes to completely destroy 3 weeks of work. When I was done, there was nothing left but churned red Georgia clay and scattered debris. I disengaged the plow, drove the tractor back to my shed, and went inside to make breakfast. Brenda showed up at my door 45 minutes later. I'd been expecting her. I opened the door with my coffee in hand. "What have you done?" Her face was red, her voice shaking with rage. "What have you done?" "I removed an unauthorized structure from my property." "That was the community garden. Do you have any idea how much money the HOA spent on that? You spent HOA money on improvements to my private property without my permission. That's embezzlement, Brenda. You're going to pay for this. I'm calling the police right now. You destroyed HOA property. You built on my property. I have a survey proving it. I have your text messages admitting you did it. I have a cease and desist letter that you ignored. Call whoever you want." She did call the police. Deputy Morrison showed up again, this time with a partner. They looked at the destroyed garden, looked at my survey, looked at Brenda's hand-drawn map, and basically said the same thing they'd said before. Civil matter. Work it out in court. But he destroyed thousands of dollars worth of improvements. Brenda was practically screaming. "Madam, if those improvements were on his property without his permission, he has a right to remove them," Deputy Morrison said. "If you disagree, you need to take it up in civil court." "This is ridiculous. He can't just destroy things. He can if they're on his property." "Look, I'm not a judge. I can't make a determination on who's right about the property line. But I can tell you that he's got a professional survey and you've got what looks like a hand-drawn map. If I was going to put thousands of dollars into improvements, I'd make darn sure I knew whose land I was improving." After the deputies left, Brenda stood in front of my destroyed garden for a long time. Then she walked back to her house without another word to me. The cease and desist letter from the HOA arrived on Monday. Apparently, I was being fined $500 per day for destruction of common area property, unauthorized alteration of community landscaping, and creating an eyesore visible from the main road. According to the letter, I now owed $1,500 for the 3 days since I'd plowed under the garden, and the fines would continue to accrue until I restored the area to its previous condition. I forwarded the letter to Marcus. He called me immediately. "This is insane. They're fining you for removing an illegal encroachment from your own property." "Can they do that?" "They can try. They can't enforce it. We'll bring this up at the injunction hearing. This actually helps our case. It shows malice and overreach. So I don't have to pay the fines." "Absolutely not. Don't pay them a penny. In fact, I'm going to amend our filing to include a harassment claim. They're clearly retaliating against you for asserting your property rights." The injunction hearing was scheduled for Wednesday of the following week. I spent the time documenting everything. I printed out all the text messages. I compiled all the photos. I prepared a timeline. Marcus seemed confident we'd win. The night before the hearing, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Vincent Xavier, a man's voice, professional and unfamiliar, speaking. This is Tom Hendricks. I'm an attorney representing the Willow Creek Estates HOA. I'm calling to see if we can resolve this matter without going to court tomorrow. I'm listening. The HOA is willing to drop all fines against you and acknowledge that there may have been some confusion about the property boundaries. In exchange, we'd ask that you agree to allow the community garden to be restored and to grant an easement for that purpose. So you want me to give you my land? It would be a limited easement for specific purposes. You'd retain ownership, but I couldn't use that part of my property. Well, it would be occupied by the community garden, so no, not for other purposes. That's a hard no, Mr. Hendricks. Mr. Xavier, I think you should consider the benefits of settling this amicably. HOA litigation can be very expensive and very protracted. Even if you win tomorrow's injunction hearing, this could drag on for years. Appeals, additional motions, fee disputes. It could cost you $50,000 or more in legal fees. Is that a threat? It's a reality of the legal system. I'm trying to save both parties time and money. Here's my counteroffer. The HOA acknowledges in writing that they built on my property without permission. They pay my legal fees to date. They agree never to enter my property or attempt to build on it again, and they remove any fines or citations from my record. That's not really a compromise. Sure it is. I'm compromising by not suing for damages, emotional distress, and harassment. The HOA stole my land, Mr. Hendricks. They don't get to negotiate for a piece of it as a settlement. I'll relay your position to my clients, but I don't think they'll agree to those terms. Then I'll see you in court tomorrow. He hung up without saying goodbye. The hearing was at 9 in the morning at the Willow Creek County Courthouse. Marcus met me outside at 8:30. We went over our arguments one more time. He'd prepared a binder with all the evidence. The survey, the photos, the text messages, the cease and desist letter, the HOA's fine letters, everything. They're going to argue that you should have waited for the court process, Marcus warned me. That by plowing under the garden you took the law into your own hands. I removed an illegal encroachment from my property. I know, and that's what we'll argue, but judges don't like self-help. They prefer everyone to go through the system. Even when the system takes weeks and the damage is happening every day. Even then. So be prepared for the judge to be somewhat critical of your actions, even if he rules in our favor overall. We entered the courtroom at 8:45. Brenda was already there with Tom Hendricks and another woman I didn't recognize. Brenda glared at me as I sat down on the opposite side of the aisle. Judge Patricia Drummond took the bench at 9 sharp. She was a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She read through the initial filings quickly, then looked up at both parties. All right, let's get to the heart of this. Mr. Hendricks, you're representing the HOA? Yes, Your Honor. And you're claiming that Mr. Xavier destroyed HOA property that was located on common area land. That's correct, Your Honor. The HOA had invested approximately $8,000 in creating a community garden on what we believed in good faith to be common area. Mr. Xavier destroyed that garden without warning. I see here that Mr. Xavier sent a text message to the HOA president stating that the garden was on his property and needed to be removed. That seems like a warning. Your Honor, that message was sent while the garden was still under construction. The HOA disputes that the land in question is private property. We believe it's designated common area under the community plat. You have a survey supporting that belief. We have the community plat map that was filed when the subdivision was created. That's not a survey. Mr. Webb, you represent Mr. Xavier, Marcus stood. Yes, Your Honor. We have a current survey showing that the garden was located 15 to 20 feet onto my client's property, well beyond any possible margin of error. This survey was prepared by a licensed surveyor and filed with the county. The HOA never obtained a survey. They simply decided to build on what they claim was common area without doing any due diligence to verify that claim. And your client plowed under the garden. After providing notice, after sending a cease and desist letter, and after the HOA refused to remove the encroachment, yes. He removed an illegal structure from his own property. Judge Drummond looked at the photos. This was more than a structure. This was a complete garden. Plants, irrigation, decorative elements. Built without permission on private property, Your Honor. My client had the right to remove it. The law generally frowns on self-help, Mr. Webb. When the legal process is too slow to prevent ongoing damage, property owners have a right to protect their interests. Every day that garden remained, the HOA's claim to that land was strengthened through adverse possession principles. My client couldn't wait weeks for an injunction, hearing while the HOA established possession of his land. The judge turned to Hendricks. Do you have any evidence other than the community plat map to support your claim that this was common area? Your Honor, the plat map clearly shows common areas throughout the subdivision. The location where the garden was built falls within those boundaries. I'm looking at the plat map now. The common areas are marked, but the boundaries aren't precisely defined. And even if they were, a plat map from 15 years ago doesn't override a current survey. Do you have anything else? Hendricks shuffled through his papers. The HOA has maintained various parts of the subdivision for years, including areas near Mr. Xavier's property. There's an established pattern of the HOA managing these spaces. Managing spaces that are actually designated as common area is very different from building structures on private property. What I'm seeing here is pretty clear-cut. You have a professional survey showing this is private property. The HOA has a plat map that's unclear at best. The HOA proceeded with construction despite being explicitly told to stop. Mr. Xavier removed the encroachment from his property. She looked at both attorneys. I'm granting the injunction. The HOA is prohibited from entering Mr. Xavier's property or constructing anything on it. Furthermore, all fines levied against Mr. Xavier related to this matter are voided. Your Honor, Hendricks stood up quickly, we'd like to request a full survey to be conducted by a court-appointed surveyor to definitively establish the property line. That's fine. File a motion for that. But until you have evidence showing that land is common area, the existing survey stands and the injunction remains in place. Anything else? Marcus stood. Your Honor, we'd like to request attorney's fees. The HOA's actions were clearly baseless and have cost my client considerable time and money. I'm going to reserve ruling on fees until we see if the HOA pursues this further. If they get their own survey and it confirms Mr. Xavier's property line, then yes, I'll likely award fees. If somehow their survey shows something different, we'll reconsider. But Mr. Hendricks, I'll tell you right now, if you continue to pursue this without any evidence to support your position, I will view that as frivolous litigation. Understood, Your Honor. We left the courthouse victorious. Marcus was pleased. That went about as well as it could have. She saw right through their argument. So what happens now? They'll probably get their own survey. When it confirms yours, they'll have to drop everything. Then we go back to court and get your attorney fees. You should get most of your money back. Most. Courts usually award reasonable fees, which might be less than the total bill, but you'll get the bulk of it. I felt the tension I'd been carrying for weeks start to ease. So it's over, this part is. But Vincent, be careful. Brenda seems like the type to hold a grudge. She might not be able to take your land, but she can make your life difficult in other ways. HOAs have a lot of little powers, and vindictive board members know how to use them. He wasn't wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, I received citations for my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, for having my garbage invisible from the street for more than 12 hours before pickup, and for parking my work truck in my driveway overnight. Each citation came with a fine. Each one was petty and clearly retaliatory. I documented all of them and sent them to Marcus. "This is harassment," he said. "Keep records of everything. If she keeps this up, we'll add it to our case." The court-appointed surveyor came out 3 weeks after the injunction hearing. He spent half a day measuring, checking pins, and reviewing the existing survey. His report confirmed exactly what my survey had shown. The garden had been 15 to 18 feet onto my property. There was no ambiguity, no question. Marcus filed for attorney's fees. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Brenda ramped up her harassment campaign. I got citations for weeds in my yard that didn't exist, for noise violations at times when I wasn't home, for unauthorized modifications to my house that I hadn't made. Each citation was accompanied by threats of fines, liens, and eventual foreclosure if I didn't comply. I responded to each one in writing, denying the violations and stating that the citations were retaliatory. I sent copies to Marcus. I also started recording every interaction I had with anyone from the HOA. The harassment campaign reached its peak about 8 weeks after I'd plowed under the garden. I came home from work one evening to find a notice on my door. It was a formal hearing notice. The HOA board was convening a special disciplinary hearing to consider revoking my right to use the common areas, including the neighborhood pool, playground, and walking trails. The grounds were continued violations of community standards and creating a hostile environment for other residents. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. I called Marcus immediately. Can they actually do this? They can hold a hearing, but they can't revoke your rights to common areas without cause, and they certainly can't do it as retaliation for you asserting your legal property rights. But you should attend the hearing and defend yourself, and I'll be there with you. Should I be worried about them actually succeeding? No. About them trying to bully and intimidate you? Yes. These disciplinary hearings can get ugly. HOA board members with grudges tend to use them as opportunities to grandstand and make accusations. Thursday came quickly. Marcus and I arrived at the clubhouse at 6:45. The main room was set up like a courtroom, with a table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. About 20 people were already there, most of them older residents who seemed to be regular attendees of HOA drama. Brenda sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members I'd seen around the neighborhood but never really talked to. There was Gerald Hampton, a retired accountant who always wore bow ties. Susan Kim, a real estate agent who tried to recruit me for her team when I'd first moved in. Deanne Richardson, a school teacher who coached youth soccer. And Robert Patterson, who owned a chain of dry cleaning stores. The hearing started promptly at 7. Brenda called it to order with a gavel that seemed unnecessarily large. This disciplinary hearing is called to order. We're here tonight to address the ongoing violations and hostile behavior of resident Vincent Xavier. Mr. Xavier, you have the right to represent yourself or have an attorney present. I see you've brought Mr. Webb. Marcus stood. For the record, I'm here as an observer and advisor. This is not a legal proceeding, so there's no formal representation. But I want to make it clear that everything said here tonight is being recorded and may be used in subsequent legal actions. Brenda's jaw tightened. Fine. Mr. Xavier has been cited for numerous violations over the past several months. These include but are not limited to improper mailbox color, visible garbage cans, overnight parking of commercial vehicles, weed growth, excessive noise, and destruction of common area property. Additionally, multiple residents have complained about his hostile and uncooperative attitude. I stood up. I'd like to address each of those accusations. You'll have a chance to speak after we've presented the full case. This isn't a trial, Brenda. You can't just make accusations without letting me respond. Gerald Hampton leaned forward. Mr. Xavier, the board has procedures we follow. We present the violations, you respond, and then we deliberate. Please sit down until called upon. Marcus put a hand on my arm. I sat down, but I was fuming. For the next 20 minutes, Brenda went through every citation she'd issued, reading them aloud with editorial commentary about how I was destroying the character of the neighborhood. She showed photos of my mailbox, my garbage can, my truck, and my yard. She presented a petition signed by 12 residents calling for action to be taken against me, though the petition didn't specify what action. When she finally finished, she turned to me. Mr. Xavier, you may now respond. I stood up again, pulling out my own folder of documents. First, let me address the property destruction claim, since that's the most serious. I didn't destroy common area property. I removed an illegal encroachment from my own property. A judge has issued an injunction confirming that the land where the garden was built is my private property, not common area. The HOA was trespassing and building without permission. I had every right to remove it. The injunction is temporary, Brenda interrupted. The matter isn't settled. The court-appointed surveyor confirmed that the land is mine. The matter is settled. You lost. Susan Kim spoke up. Even if the land is yours, you could have handled it differently. You didn't have to destroy the garden. That was aggressive and unnecessary. I sent notice. I sent a cease and desist letter. I asked multiple times for the HOA to stop. You ignored all of that and continued building. What was I supposed to do? Let you establish adverse possession of my land? You could have waited for the court process, Gerald said, while you continued to build and strengthen your claim to my property. No. Brenda held up a hand. Let's move on to the other violations. You've been cited for your mailbox being the wrong color. Our guidelines specify black mailboxes, and yours is clearly dark gray. I pulled out a paint chip. This is the paint used on my mailbox. It's called Midnight Black. It is black. You cited me because you don't like me, not because my mailbox is the wrong color. It looks gray. Because you want it to look gray. Next accusation. We went through each citation. The garbage can that had been visible for more than 12 hours. I had security camera footage showing I'd put it away within 6 hours of pickup. The commercial vehicle. My personal truck that happened to have my company's logo on it, which wasn't prohibited by any HOA rule. The weeds. I had photos showing my yard was well maintained. The noise. I wasn't home at the time of the alleged violation. For every accusation, I had evidence showing it was false or exaggerated. Marcus had helped me prepare thoroughly, and it showed. By the end of my response, Brenda looked furious. The other board members looked uncomfortable. It was obvious to everyone in the room what was happening. This was a vendetta, pure and simple. "The board will now deliberate," Brenda announced. "Everyone except board members please leave the room." Marcus stood up. "Actually, Georgia law requires that HOA board meetings be open to all members unless discussing specific legal matters or personnel issues. This is a disciplinary hearing, not a legal consultation, so it has to remain open." "That's ridiculous," Brenda said. "We need privacy to discuss." "You need to follow the law. The Georgia Property Owners Association Act is very clear on this point." Brenda looked at Tom Hendricks, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. He nodded. "He's right. The deliberation has to be public." The board members huddled together at their table, speaking in low voices that were still audible to those of us in the front row. It quickly became clear that there was disagreement. Diane Richardson seemed to be pushing back against Brenda. "I don't think we have grounds to revoke his access to common areas," Diane said, not quite quietly enough. "He's defended himself against every accusation." "He destroyed HOA property," Brenda insisted. "The judge said it was his property. We can't keep pretending otherwise." "We're appealing that decision." "Are we? I don't remember voting on that." Robert Patterson joined in. "I don't remember that either." "Brenda, have you been making decisions without board approval?" "I'm acting in the best interest of the community." "That's not how this works." "We vote on major decisions." The conversation continued for another few minutes before Brenda seemed to realize that everyone could hear them. She called for a formal vote. "All in favor of revoking Mr. Xavier's access to common areas." Brenda raised her hand. No one else did. "Motion fails," Gerald said, looking relieved. "Is there anything else to discuss?" "We should consider lesser sanctions," Brenda said. "Fines, a formal warning, something." "For what?" Susan asked. "He's shown that our citations were wrong. We don't have grounds for sanctions." "This is ridiculous," Brenda said. "He's making a mockery of this board and this community." "He's defending himself," Deanne said. "That's not the same thing." "Look, Brenda, I supported the community garden idea. I thought it was nice. But if it was on his property, then we shouldn't have built it there. And we definitely shouldn't be harassing him because he removed it." "I'm not harassing anyone. You've cited him for things that clearly aren't violations. We all see what's happening here." Brenda looked around the table. She was losing control and she knew it. "Fine. This hearing is adjourned." She slammed the gavel down and walked out of the room. The other board members looked at each other awkwardly. Finally, Gerald spoke to the remaining residents. "The board has voted not to impose any sanctions against Mr. Xavier. This matter is closed." People started filing out. Marcus and I stayed behind as the board members packed up their materials. Diane Richardson approached us. "Mr. Xavier, I want to apologize. I supported the garden project, but I didn't realize there was a question about the property line. If I'd known, I would have insisted we get a survey first." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." Brenda can be very persuasive. She convinced us the land was common area and we trusted her. That was our mistake. Is she going to keep pushing this? Deanne glanced at the door where Brenda had exited. "I don't know, but I can tell you that after tonight she doesn't have the full board's support anymore. If she tries anything else, I'll vote against it." We left the clubhouse feeling cautiously optimistic. Marcus thought the hearing had actually helped our case. If they keep retaliating and the rest of the board is turning against Brenda, she'll either back down or do something stupid that gives us an even stronger case. The attorney's fee hearing was 2 weeks later. Judge Drummond had reviewed all the evidence, including the court-appointed surveyor's report. She was not happy with the HOA. "Mr. Hendricks, your clients built a substantial improvement on private property after being explicitly told to stop." They continued to assert they had rights to that land, despite having no evidence to support that claim. They then retaliated against Mr. Xavier with frivolous citations and a disciplinary hearing. This is exactly the kind of behavior that courts discourage. Your Honor, the HOA believed in good faith. Good faith requires some basis in fact, Mr. Hendricks. They had a vague plat map and nothing else. They didn't get a survey. They didn't verify the property line. They just decided what they wanted to do and did it. That's not good faith. That's negligence at best and intentional encroachment at worst. The HOA is willing to compensate Mr. Xavier for his attorney's fees in a reasonable amount. I'm going to award the full amount requested, $42,000. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to pay within 30 days or face additional sanctions. And Mr. Hendricks, you need to have a serious conversation with your client about continuing this pattern of behavior. If Mr. Xavier has to come back to court because of more retaliation, I'm going to consider sanctioning the HOA board members personally. The ruling felt like a complete victory. $42,000 would cover all of Marcus's fees plus the surveyor I'd hired initially. The HOA had to pay for their overreach. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But Brenda wasn't done. A month after the fee ruling, I received a notice that the HOA had placed a lien on my property for unpaid assessments. According to the notice, I owed $12,000 in back dues, late fees, and accrued interest. I called Marcus immediately. This is impossible. I've paid every assessment on time. I have the canceled checks. Send me copies of everything. This is clearly more retaliation, but we need to document it. I sent him 3 years' worth of canceled checks showing every HOA payment I'd made. Every single one had been paid on time or early. There was no basis for the lien. Marcus filed an emergency motion to remove the lien. The hearing was set for a week later. But in the meantime, the lien was on my property's title, which meant I couldn't refinance or sell without dealing with it first. At the hearing, Marcus presented all the canceled checks. The HOA's attorney, Tom Hendricks again, looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, there appears to have been an accounting error. The HOA will withdraw the lien. An accounting error, Marcus said, or intentional harassment. This is the 3rd time we've been in court because the HOA has taken baseless action against my client. At what point does this become sanctionable harassment? Judge Drummond looked at the evidence. Mr. Hendricks, who authorized this lien, the HOA president, Brenda Mortimer, did she have any basis for believing Mr. Xavier hadn't paid his assessments? She stated that she couldn't find record of the payments, because she didn't look, or because she looked and ignored what she found. I can't speak to her internal process, Your Honor. Here's what I'm going to do. The lien is removed immediately. The HOA will pay Mr. Xavier's attorney's fees for this hearing. And I'm issuing a restraining order prohibiting the HOA from taking any enforcement action against Mr. Xavier without first providing clear documentation of a violation and giving him 30 days to respond. Any further baseless actions will result in personal sanctions against the board members who authorize them. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor. The restraining order seemed to finally get through to the HOA board. For 2 months, I heard nothing from them. No citations, no letters, no harassment. I actually started to relax and enjoy my property. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late September, I got a call from Marcus that I wasn't expecting. Vincent, you need to sit down for this. What happened? Brenda Mortimer was arrested this morning. For what? Embezzlement. The HOA treasurer, Robert Patterson, apparently got suspicious after all the court cases and hired a forensic accountant to review the books. Turns out Brenda's been stealing from the HOA for at least 3 years. somewhere around $200,000. I sat down at my kitchen table, processing this information. 200,000. That's the preliminary estimate. She was writing checks to fake vendors, creating phony invoices, using the HOA credit card for personal expenses. The accountant found all sorts of irregularities. Robert went to the police yesterday and they arrested her this morning. Holy hell. There's more. Remember that community garden she built on your property? She billed the HOA $8,000 for it, but the actual cost was probably closer to $3,000. She pocketed the difference. So she was using my property to commit fraud. Looks like it. The district attorney is building a case. They're charging her with felony embezzlement, fraud, and a few other things. She could be looking at serious prison time. Does this affect any of our cases? Not really. You've already won everything. But it does explain why she was so aggressive with the garden project. She needed to show big, visible improvements to justify the money she was claiming to spend. Your property just happened to be in the right spot for what she wanted to do. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged. Brenda had been systematically stealing from the HOA almost from the moment she'd been elected president 4 years earlier. She'd started small, padding invoices and keeping the difference. But she'd gotten bolder over time, creating entirely fake projects and vendors. The community garden was just one of many schemes. The HOA held an emergency meeting to elect a new president. Diane Richardson was chosen. Her first act was to send me a formal letter of apology on behalf of the board. She acknowledged that the HOA had wronged me, apologized for the harassment, and assured me that nothing like it would happen again. The criminal trial took place the following spring. I was called as a witness to testify about the garden project. I explained how Brenda had built it on my property without permission, how I'd removed it, and how she'd retaliated. The prosecutor used my testimony to show a pattern of Brenda using HOA funds for projects that served her personal agenda rather than the community. The jury convicted her on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, though everyone knew she'd spent the money and would never be able to pay it back. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, Marcus turned to me. Hell of a journey from a property line dispute to a felony conviction. I just wanted her to stay off my land. Well, she's definitely going to stay off your land now, for at least 6 years. We both laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. The whole situation had been exhausting and expensive, even with the fee awards. I'd spent countless hours dealing with Brenda's harassment, documenting violations, preparing for hearings, and worrying about what would come next. But standing there in the spring sunshine, I felt a sense of closure. My property was mine. The HOA had new leadership that seemed reasonable. Brenda was going to prison. Justice, delayed and complicated as it was, had been served. I drove home through Willow Creek Estates, past the community pool and playground, past the well-maintained lawns and matching mailboxes. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment looking at the piece of land where Brenda's garden had been. The grass had grown back. You couldn't tell that anything had ever been there. That weekend, I started building my own garden. Not where Brenda had put hers, but in a different spot on my property that got better sun and had better drainage. I built raised beds out of cedar, installed a proper irrigation system, and planted tomatoes, peppers, beans, squash, and herbs. Everything I'd been planning before Brenda had tried to steal my land. Diane Richardson stopped by while I was working. "That looks great," she said. "Much better location than where the other one was. Thanks. Better drainage here. Listen, I know this past year has been awful, but I hope you'll still feel like part of the community. We're not all like Brenda. I know. I appreciate you saying that. If you ever want to participate in actual HOA projects on actual common areas, you'd be welcome. We're planning to renovate the playground next month. Could use volunteers. I'll think about it. She smiled and walked back to her car. I returned to my garden, my hands in the soil, working on my own property in peace. The tomatoes came in heavy that summer. I grew more than I could eat, so I started bringing bags of vegetables to the monthly HOA meetings, which I'd started attending to keep an eye on things. People were surprised at first, but they appreciated the fresh produce. It became a regular thing. Vincent's tomatoes and peppers, grown on the property that the previous HOA president had tried to steal. One evening in August, Robert Patterson pulled me aside after a meeting. You know, it's funny. Brenda went to all that trouble to build a community garden and it never produced anything. You've actually given us a community garden, just not in the way she intended. I'm just growing more than I can use. Seemed like a waste not to share. Still, it's appreciated. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry about everything that happened. We should have questioned Brenda more. We should have insisted on a survey before building anything. We trusted her, and that trust was misplaced. Water under the bridge, I said. The new board seems solid. We're trying. Deanne's doing a good job. We hired a new management company to handle the finances so nothing like Brenda's situation can happen again. We're actually auditing all the vendors and contracts. Turns out she had her fingers in a lot of pies. I heard. Yeah, it's been eye-opening, but we're cleaning house. Getting back to basics. Actually serving the community instead of using it as a personal piggy bank. I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt since I'd bought the house, like I actually belonged in this neighborhood. It had taken a year and a half, tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, countless hours of stress, and a criminal conviction, but things had finally settled into something resembling normal. My garden flourished. The HOA left me alone. Brenda remained in prison, her appeals denied. The neighborhood got new playground equipment, funded properly this time with transparent accounting. Life in Willow Creek Estates moved forward. Sometimes, when I was working in my garden on a quiet weekend morning, I'd look over at the spot where Brenda's illegal garden had been. I'd remember the anger I'd felt watching her plan on my property, the frustration of dealing with her harassment, the stress of the legal battles. But mostly, I felt grateful that I'd stood my ground. She'd tried to take what was mine, and she'd failed. Not because I was particularly brave or clever, but because I'd had the resources to fight back and the stubbornness to see it through. A lot of people wouldn't have been able to do that. They'd have been worn down by the process, bankrupted by the legal fees, or intimidated by the threats. That's what Brenda had counted on. She'd built a career out of bullying people into submission, but she'd picked the wrong person this time. I'd plowed her garden under, fought her in court, and outlasted her campaign of harassment. And in the end, her own crimes had brought her down. The story became something of a legend in Willow Creek Estates. New residents would hear about it and ask questions. I'd give them the short version. HOA president built a garden on my property without permission. I removed it, she retaliated, and eventually went to prison for embezzling from the HOA. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but the core message was always the same. Property rights matter, and even HOAs can't just take what isn't theirs. 2 years after I'd plowed under Brenda's garden, I was elected to the HOA board. I hadn't wanted the position, but Deanne had asked me to run, and enough neighbors had encouraged me that I'd agreed. My first act as a board member was to propose a policy requiring professional surveys before the HOA undertook any project near private property lines. The board approved it unanimously. My second act was to establish a formal appeals process for citations, with an independent review before fines could be imposed. I'd seen firsthand how a vindictive board member could weaponize the citation process, and I wanted safeguards in place. The board implemented both policies, along with several others designed to make the HOA more transparent and accountable. We published detailed financial reports quarterly. We live-streamed board meetings for residents who couldn't attend in person. We created a suggestion box and actually responded to the suggestions. Willow Creek Estates became a better place to live. Not perfect, but better. And my 3 acres remained mine, fully and completely, with a thriving garden that I'd built with my own hands on my own property. Looking back, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I just let Brenda have that piece of land. If I'd decided it wasn't worth the fight, wasn't worth the stress and expense. Life would certainly have been easier in the short term. But I'd have spent the rest of my time in that house knowing that someone had stolen from me and gotten away with it. I'd have seen that garden every day, a constant reminder of my own unwillingness to defend what was mine. Instead, I'd fought. I'd won. And I'd helped transform the HOA into something better in the process. The land where Brenda's illegal garden had been was now part of my lawn, green and peaceful. And the garden I'd built in the right spot continued to produce more vegetables than I could eat, enough to share with neighbors who'd become friends. On warm summer evenings, I'd sometimes sit on my porch with a beer, looking out over my property. All 3 acres of it. Mine. Hard won and properly defended. And I'd think about Brenda, sitting in a prison cell somewhere, perhaps regretting the choices that had led her there. Perhaps blaming me for standing up to her. Perhaps still believing she'd done nothing wrong. It didn't matter. She'd put her garden on my side of the line. I'd plowed it under. She'd gotten no compensation. And justice, in its slow and complicated way, had been served. The experience taught me things I hadn't expected to learn. I learned that sometimes you have to fight, even when fighting is expensive and exhausting. I learned that bullies often overreach and bring about their own downfall. I learned that communities can heal and improve after bad leadership is removed. And I learned that the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but simply living well on your own terms, on your own land, with a garden that actually produces something worthwhile. 3 years after it all started, I was finally at peace. My property was secure. My garden was thriving. The HOA was functioning properly. And Brenda Mortimer was exactly where she belonged, paying the price for years of theft and abuse of power. The whole saga had been a masterclass in property rights, HOA law, and the importance of standing your ground when you're in the right. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Every single difficult moment had been worth it to be able to stand on my own land, looking at my own garden, knowing that no one could take it from me ever again.